to the SDG Warriors Podcast. I'm Simar Mohanty, the team lead and student coordinator at SDG Warriors. We are a team of passionate student change makers and STEMness on a mission to achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, leveraging the power of STEM education and 21st century skills. Brought to you by us SDG Warriors, this podcast features inspiring stories from STEM experts and edu heroes around the world. Ideal for students, teachers, parents, and pretty much anybody interested in STEM education and social impact, this podcast aims to provide enriching learning experiences and drive positive change in local, global, and digital communities. And today, we are going to be in conversation with an amazing superhero hero, Dr. Emma Camp. To give a short overview, Dr. Emma is the team leader of the Future Reefs Team at the University of Technology, Sydney. Her groundbreaking research focuses on the physiology, ecology, and bio-geochemistry of coral reefs, exploring how environmental changes impact coral fitness and survival. Her work spans from molecular signatures to broad ecological interactions, aiming to develop innovative solutions for preserving and rebuilding healthy reefs. And a passionate advocate for women in STEM, Dr. Emma is also a National Geographic Explorer. How cool is that? It's an absolute honor to have you on our podcast today, Dr. Emma.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Right. So before we dive into our conversation, to help our listeners audibly visualize the entire experience, can you tell us where are you located, what's the weather like outside, and what can you see from your window?
I can. So I am located in my office, which is in the centre of Sydney in Australia. And I am in a glass office, which is inside a bigger building. And if I look through my window to the other window, I can see that it's actually a little bit cloudy outside. We're in winter here at the moment. So it's maybe around kind of 10 degrees here at the moment. And as I'm in a city campus, I can see other buildings, but we have a nice green space area outside of our office.
Well, that looks awesome. As for me, I'm in Bangalore, India, where it's a chilled, cloudy morning with a light mist in the air. From my window, let's see. I can see a lot of vehicles on the road and the metro, which is ready for departure for its next destination.
Nice.
All right. Diving right into our conversation, let's start at the beginning and take a walk down memory lane. Dr. Emma, could you describe what was your childhood and school days like, and how did your early life in Essex inspire you to pursue a career in marine biology, shaping your passion for the ocean?
Great question. So I grew up in Essex, England. We have beaches and coasts, and I always loved spending time there. I enjoyed spending time in nature in particular. I always loved biology in school. I was always fascinated by science. So that was always kind of a passion for me. I don't think I really, especially in primary school, knew exactly kind of what a coral reef would be from, kind of a really sciencey perspective. But it was actually through my parents' love for travel, and we would save money up to go travel. And so through that opportunity, I was able to actually go overseas and see a coral reef for the first time when I was about 7, 8 years old. And that helped me kind of fall in love with marine biology and really helped shape my passion for the ocean.
Right. It's so amazing that our earliest experiences can shape what we become passionate about. Growing up in Essex clearly sparked your love for the ocean. And speaking of new beginnings, Dr. Emma, transitioning from a professional basketball career to marine biology is quite unique. So, how do your experiences in basketball or in general sports contribute to your scientific career?
Yeah. Look, I think so much more than I probably ever anticipated. I played sport from a young age. I was lucky enough to represent England and Great Britain in several competitions. And so playing basketball at this high level, went over to the US to play And I learned, the importance of teamwork. I learned how to deal with failure. I learned how to work really hard over consistent periods of time to try and get to, the goal that I wanted to achieve. The importance of mental health and mental fitness alongside physical fitness. So I think there's a lot of skills that I take now to my everyday role, particularly in team leadership. I have a big team and I have different personalities and different projects, and we all need to work cohesively for the best outcomes for the reef ultimately. So yeah, I really never anticipated when I went down, a basketball career, that there would be so many things that benefit me still today.
Absolutely. Teamwork, failure, persistence, and overall health, physical and mental. The discipline and teamwork in sports definitely provided a solid grounding for your research endeavors. Now, shifting our gears from sports to science, I'm curious about your research journey. So, Dr. Emma, what drew you to focus on your bio-geochemical series of reef associated habitats during your PhD at the University of Essex? And could you explain it like you would to a 12-year-old?
Yes, indeed. So I was working at the time at a research station in the Caribbean, and that was great because it exposed me to lots of different types of researchers. Researchers would come to the centre to do their focus. Maybe they were a PhD student or they had their own lab. And so through that experience, I got to kind of see the types of science that I enjoyed. And through that, I saw that people were studying reefs that had systems associated with them. So things like seagrasses, things like mangroves, these are habitats that are commonly found next to coral reefs, but they're very different. So things like temperature, things like pH, which is basically how acidic the waters are, they're very different in those environments relative to your typical coral reef. And I wanted to understand how those systems that live very close to corals and have corals in them maybe shape the tolerance of corals to future stress. So if we think about temperature, the oceans are getting hotter, but actually these reef associated systems naturally are quite hot compared to reef environments anyway. So you can think of them as like a natural laboratory, if you like, to go and study how corals might deal with stresses such as higher temperatures. And so that was really what I was interested in, and it became kind of a bit of a exploration early on in my PhD to see how common these systems were, how often corals were found there, and then how extreme they were, what actually were the conditions that corals were surviving in. And ultimately that kind of led me down the path of my PhD and a lot of the research that I've done since then.
Well, Dr. Emma, it's clear that your academic focus has been both profound and impactful and completely full of exploration, especially in understanding these complex ecosystems. Speaking of the impact, there's a pivotal moment in your research that I'd love to delve into. Could you please tell us more about the moment you discovered supercorals and what it meant for your research?
Yeah. So looking in these extreme systems that we just discussed, there was sort of a moment during my PhD where I was going around and I had sensors basically, so a handheld device that's got probes on it that measures the temperature, the acidity, the salinity, and how much oxygen's in the water. And some of them are handheld and some of them you deploy in the water and you come back and collect at a later date. So between those two different methods, like I came back and kind of got my data and saw that the conditions were really, really extreme, and a lot more extreme than really we thought that corals should be able to survive in. So a lot hotter, a lot lower oxygen, a lot lower pH. So the first thing was like, there must be something wrong with the equipment. So the first thing as a scientist is to like, okay, let's repeat this again and go back and check that it wasn't just an anomaly, and then to collect longer data for longer periods of time to check that this was actually not just an issue maybe with the equipment, but also just a one-off in the environment. And so then when I had that data, it's like, okay, these corals really are living in these extreme environments. And it was exciting because it challenged the perception that corals can't be tolerant. But it also was concerning because you also saw in these systems where there were these extreme conditions, a lot less diversity, smaller corals, less reef accretion. And so they were providing both potentially a stock of hardened corals to future conditions, but also a natural laboratory to say, well, if we don't tackle climate change, this could be the sorts of corals that are left. And so it really was a pivotal moment. It was exciting because it's always exciting to kind of discover something that challenges, you know, your own perceptions and perceptions in the community of tolerance regarding corals. And it's led to lots of exciting research since then.
Right. During experiments as well, when we students see that something unusual is happening, we tend to repeat the experiments and recheck our readings. But in your case, you discovered something completely new, and this proved to be a pivotal moment for climate action as well, and a game changer for your research and for the broader scientific community, which leads us to another significant milestone in your career. Well, Dr. Emma, what was the driving force behind co founding the Coral Nurtures program, and what impact has it had on coral, local reef reliant businesses?
Yeah. So here in Australia, we have the Great Barrier Reef. So one of the biggest reef structures on the planet, visible from space and hugely important. And like corals around the world, they've experienced what we would call coral bleaching. So if we think of corals as being an animal, they have microscopic algae that live inside the animal, and they're really important. They actually photosynthesize, they provide a lot of energy for the coral. And then there's bacteria and viruses and other things. And collectively, we call that a holobiome, which means a whole biology. Now, that's great. They work really well together when the abiotic conditions, the environment is in balance. But when we see stress, for example, too much heat, that partnership breaks down, the algae leave the coral, and then the coral looks white. And so we say the coral's bleached at that point. So if I'm talking about a bleaching event, I'm really talking about that breakdown of that fundamental symbiosis that is the fundamental requirement for healthy coral reefs. So here in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef experienced the first back-to-back marine heat waves that led to mass coral bleaching events in 2016 and 2017. And about 50% of the reef was impacted, and there was estimated that about 30% of the reef died from those back-to-back events. So it was a really pivotal moment here in Australia about how the reef is managed. And from that, the Reef Authority that manages the Great Barrier Reef started to look more into active interventions and think about what are other ways we can build reef resilience. And at a similar time, we were speaking and working with some members in the tourism industry, in particular, John Edmondson at Wavelength Reef Cruises. And it became apparent that the tourism industry also wanted to help the reef, and they wanted to be site stewards and understand how they could do things to do with preserving and building resilience of the reef. And so that was really the motivation for us to co-found Coral Nurture Program, a site stewardship partnership between science and tourism to build reef resilience at sites. So we grow and plant out corals to try to increase at local scale the diversity and the coral cover at those sites.
That's so inspiring. Right from the start, when you talked about coral bleaching, the harmful effects of it that was witnessed in 2016, then you thought about building coral resilience, and then later you decided to also involve the local communities, that is the intersection of tourism and science. It's really inspiring to see how initiatives like the Coral Nurture Program can directly benefit local communities and ecosystems, because we need to walk the talk when we say think global and act local. That's something that your program is definitely doing. Well, moving on, let's explore the practical side of your work. Can you tell us more about the innovative techniques or technologies that you've developed or utilized in your research?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky, like at the lab that I have here at the University of Technology, Sydney, there's a lot of different technology that's available here for us. But I think in terms of kind of the research space that I operate, there's a kind of a few key things I think that have been really transformative. So in the space of Coral Nurture Program, one of the early challenges that we had was that if we wanted to get corals out onto the reef as part of the tourism everyday activities, we needed something that was quick, that was non-harmful, and there weren't health and safety kind of concerns with it, but also that we could put more of them in quickly. And there wasn't something readily available. Often people were using epoxies or chemicals that would take time to kind of set in the water, and that wasn't something that was going to work for our program. So we designed Coral Clip, and this was really championed by John Edmondson, one of the co-founders at Wavelength Reef Cruises and of Coral Nurture program, to basically create this device that allowed us to attach the coral to the reef very quickly. I'll actually show you. I've got one right here. So it's a very simple clip design like this. And basically we can hammer it in and put the coral underneath. And within about a month, the coral grows over these clips. So very cheap to make, very simple. And so now this coral clip is used in over 20 countries around the world that are doing restoration activities, because it's a really cheap, simple and effective solution to get corals back onto the reef. So that's one example. Another area where we're doing a lot of work and a lot of innovation is around what we call coral phenomics. So basically, when you think of phenomics, it's a characteristic, right? So you could have eye color, for example. For corals, we're really interested in their tolerance to different stresses such as heat. So in this regard, we need to know that the corals that we're outplanting or the restoration activities that we're undertaking, those corals have got the best chance to survive future conditions, because we don't want to go to all of this effort and then they die. So we have to make decisions on the corals that we use. And so, yes, trying to find kind of super corals in these unique locations, that's one method, but there's not that many of them. And so we need to try to see, well, actually on normal reefs, if we look at them, are there actually corals there that are very tolerant, that we could start to identify and use those in restoration? And so we've developed something called a multi-taxophena plate, which is a plate where we can take very small bits of corals, we put them in there, we heat them very, very quickly, so over about 40 minutes. And then we get like a performance curve, and we can basically see if coral A versus coral B has got higher abilities to withstand acute thermal stress, so very rapid thermal stress. So we've been using that, and we are now trying to understand how well kind of the predictions that we get from that technology. So that technology says we think coral A is going to be better at heat than coral B. We're now trying to understand how well that matches what actually happens in the environment during heat stress. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. It's very much in a novel research and development phase. But for me, technology is going to be key to help us scale up and streamline the processes of bringing science into actual practice that practitioners and communities around the world can actually utilize.
Right. Often the simplest solutions are the most effective, and the solutions need to be cheap and easily available. You talked about having the coral clip built for you, and generally what happens is that when we don't have technology available, that we don't have the tools available, a scientific mindset, a curious mindset will always allow you to become a maker and make it. So that's something that coral clip really resonated with me. Well, the advancements in technology are definitely opening up new frontiers across domains. And speaking of frontiers, let's dive deeper into how corals adapt into challenging environmental conditions. We were curious to know, how do corals manage to survive in such extreme conditions with higher temperatures, lower pH, and low oxygen levels at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm not going to be able to give you all the answers, because I'm still spending my career trying to figure that one out. But we do know some things. So we know, for example, that often the algae, so when we went back to talking about what a coral is, and it's that animal with those microalgae that live inside, we know that often the type of algae is different. So it's a different species, same family, but different species that actually associates with the corals in these extreme systems. And we think that they're better able to kind of maintain that stress and not leave under stress. So that's part of it. We also know that the bacteria, which are really important to the stability of the coral holobiont, are different in these environments. So they also play a role. And again, one of the challenges is there's so many bits that make up a coral that you see, with the bacteria, the animal, the Symbiodiniaceae, and then all of the other microorganisms. Like, we have to be quite systematic to try to pinpoint what it is. We also know that actually the physiology of the coral is different in these systems. So they photosynthesize at different rates. They calcify slightly differently. And this ultimately all comes down to energy. It requires more energy for these corals to survive in these conditions. So they have to find ways to get more of that energy. And so having the different algae is one potential strategy. We think that the nutrient environment in these systems is very different, and that can support their survival. And also that they may be able to feed more. So an interesting thing about coral is that I mentioned that they get resources from the algae that photosynthesize. Corals can also feed. So they've got a little mouth and they put out little tentacles, and they can take things in from the water. And so we think that that's a really important mechanism as well for these corals, to help them get more resources to tolerate the stress. So there's still going to be lots more for us to uncover. We're currently doing more molecular work, trying to understand if there are certain genes that are different. Are the species actually slightly different? Are they has the population evolved over time to be slightly different? So there's all of these questions that we're trying to answer. So in summary, it's not a single mechanism. It seems to be, a consortium of strategies that these corals are utilizing. And it's a really good blueprint for us to start to ask questions about how corals may be able to survive future conditions, knowing what these strategies are in these extreme corals.
Right. Different species of algae, bacteria, and then the different rates of photosynthesis and calcification, nutrient systems. I think energy plays a key role here. So
Yes.
definitely that's going to be something that's going to be revealed in the future based on your research, and we'll be really looking forward to that. The adaptability showcased by these supercorals is really remarkable, and this reminds me about the extremophiles in the Amazon rainforest, which Dr. Rosa talked about in our previous episode. So, on a similar note, I'm intrigued by the unique environments that these corals inhabit, like mangrove lagoons. So, Dr. Emma, how do corals in mangrove lagoons adapt to extreme conditions, and what can this teach us about resilience to climate change?
Yeah, so very similar to kind of the last question, we're still trying to understand a lot about what these mechanisms are, and really these kind of mechanisms in these corals in these lagoons are really the super corals as well. So a lot of synergies. I think one of the big things that we're starting to learn, particularly about kind of mangrove corals and those locations, is that mangrove systems are very nutrient rich. A lot of that leaf litter that's there that goes into the water, it decomposes, and that's part of what makes the conditions very different. It creates those low oxygen environments. Often mangroves have bird communities, and then bird poo goes into the water, and that actually adds nutrients and things to the water column. So again, it's circling around that idea of nutrients and of key resources that can give corals a boost in these conditions. So yeah, it's very similar to what we've seen in any of these extreme systems, and that's kind of what's for me exciting with looking, is that when we look across, not even things like mangroves and seagrasses where I've done a lot of my work, but we look broader as a community across things like carbon dioxide vents, and we look in the hot seas, and we look at these other locations that have been described as kind of extreme systems. There are these commonalities of things such as diversifying how corals get their energy and having more nutrients that seem to be beneficial. And so these are kind of then giving us these clues about how we could try to help corals under climate change.
Right. Understanding the preconditioning mechanisms definitely offers hope for the future of coral reefs. And on the note of that, we'd love to know, how are corals preconditioned to future climatic conditions, and what does this mean for their survival?
Yeah. So there's still lots of work going on in this space, but trying to understand really, is there kind of like an environmental memory, or is there a capacity for populations to build adaptation and basically become more tolerant to a condition because they've experienced it before? So simply, these corals in these extreme systems on a daily basis experience low pH, low oxygen, high temperature, which are all stressors. And because they experience it every day, there's this idea that they basically adapt, or they have adjusted their physiology or molecular mechanisms to actually be able to survive there. And the key is that if they then pass that on to their offspring, then that is then kind of a built-in adaptation into that population that over time can bring in enhanced tolerance. And so for us, it's that kind of idea that this pre-exposure to stress over most of their lifetime really is kind of giving them this capacity to withstand to a greater capacity these stresses. So as an example, we've recently run an experiment where we've taken some corals from these extreme systems and we've moved them out to a reef environment that's more stable, and we've left them there for 1 year. And then we've compared how that coral deals with thermal stress relative to the same species found on the reef. And we found that even after a year of being in that more stable environment and out of that extreme system, they still had higher thermal tolerance capacity. So again, it suggests that preconditioning has led to something that has sustained that coral even after a year of being out of that environment to deal better with future stress. So it's really fascinating. There's lots of researchers around the world looking into this idea of environmental memory and how that could shape tolerance. And I think it's an exciting area of research for sure.
Absolutely. Environmental memory is so fascinating, passing on adaptive strategies to their progeny. Well, these adaptations definitely provide incredible insights into the resilient strategies, not just for corals, but potentially for broader ecological applications as well. And this brings me to my next question, Dr. Emma. As a species, what can we human beings or Homo sapiens learn from supercorals?
So I think what we can learn is a couple of things. From a coral perspective, I think we can learn not to, give up on corals, right? Like when I see these corals and they're living in these really hostile environments, I think, okay, things are bad. Like all of the predictions for reefs are bad. We're losing reefs. Like, it's a really uncertain future for coral reefs. But to see that there are these corals that are surviving in these conditions, and even on the reef after bleaching events, there's corals that are trying to recover. It kind of gives me this hope that like the corals are trying their best to be resilient, to be super, to continue, and like we need to do everything in our power to support them in that process. And I guess from a kind of a more kind of philosophical angle, I guess is just that these super corals, at least for me, are that challenge of the norm, and to kind of a reminder to not just accept things are I remember learning in school corals survive at this temperature and they survive at this condition, and that's kind of what you learn. And then these corals like are doing something very different to that. So again, the just that reminder to question, to explore, to find answers for yourself, because we need that to have innovation and to ultimately solve the challenges that we're facing today.
Definitely. These lessons from supercorals certainly resonate beyond marine biology, touching on broader themes of resilience and adaptation. In the face of uncertainty, like if you're talking on a philosophical note, don't give up. And then absolutely. And fighting for survival, we need to do everything in our reach to help these coral reefs.
Yes.
Well, talking about the future, Dr. Emma, what do you envision for the future of coral reefs given the current research and environmental challenges?
Yeah. So look, it's definitely a precarious future for coral reefs. I think if we look at all of the predictions that are out there, that if we hit, 2 degrees of warming, that there'll be kind of less than 1% of the reef left. There's they're dire predictions for reefs, and we're seeing it's the 4th mass global coral bleaching event that's been occurring over the summers around the planet at the moment. Here in Australia, it's been the 5th mass bleaching event in the past 8 years. So, there's no way to sugarcoat the severity of the threat that reefs are facing. But the other part of that is that I kind of remain, a cautioned, optimist that, we've got people around the planet trying to do the best to solve the problems and the challenges that we're facing. Ultimately trying to buy time for reefs. Like, we have to tackle the issue of climate change, and if we don't do that, then it's not just going to be reefs, it's going to be all of the other ecosystems as well that are threatened. But for me, I remain hopeful. We've got, we know what the problems are. We know that corals can be resilient if we give them the chance. And, the younger generation and their awareness of the challenges and the importance of the environment, and that failure to just accept that we're just going to continue to degrade our environment and that's just the way it's going to be, fills me with hope that if we can kind of just give corals enough time, that we can get the change that we want to see at the international level on carbon emissions and other fossil fuel emissions.
Well, those insights are spot on. I've been following the news about coral reefs and ocean acidification, coral bleaching, and also deoxygenation, and it gets really depressing. It feels like we are in this desperate race to save these ecosystems. But then, seeing on the other hand, it's very encouraging to hear about all the creative ideas people are coming up with, that scientists are coming up with, their research, their innovations to protect these reefs. There's clearly a lot of things that we need to do, a lot of work to be done, but seeing the level of effort and innovation, that gives us some hope for the future. Well, Dr. Emma, we'd love to know, from all your adventures so far, what have been your biggest learnings?
Oh, this is a really a big question. I think one of them would be how much we still don't know, and that's just not about corals. It's about actually where coral reefs are. It's what's in our oceans, and the more we look, the more we realize how much we still have yet to discover. And I think for me, that's probably one of the biggest risks that we face, is that we're going to be losing biodiversity, and we're going to be losing the capacity for knowledge and innovation that we never even knew about because we haven't conserved these environments. So definitely that would be one thing. I think that the most exciting and successful projects happen when people work together, and people from different disciplines and different backgrounds. And one of the highlights of my job is being able to work with people, and to learn from people and to listen. And that's one of the things I'm really proud with Coral Nurture program, is that it was built with the community. It was built with scientists, and we each brought different things to the table. And so, as an example, from a scientific perspective, I could say, okay, this site's perfect to plant corals because, of this model and of this, conditions. And then you speak with the community and they're like, well, there's just never really been that much coral at this site. Okay, well, they've been there studying that site, for 20 plus years. There must be some reason that I haven't thought of, I'm just not aware of, that's probably not the best site. And so then you can integrate that knowledge together to kind of work out where it does make the most sense. And so I think for me, definitely, that part. And then I think finally, just really being authentic and, just having your integrity and what you believe in, and just really kind of not letting external pressures shape that. It's very easy to feel, pulled in lots of directions. But for me, I got into this because I love the ocean. I love the reef. I want my son to be able to see corals when he's older, and that's my motivation. And so, again, reminding myself why did I decide to do this, and what is it that drives me to get up every day, and the motivation. And I think that helps to remember that that's the reason that I fell in love. Why did I fall in love with reefs? Because they're beautiful and they're majestic and they're magical, and just never forgetting that, I think, is key, because it can be sometimes confronting and challenging and tiring and hard, but actually to step back and say, why did I get into this, and having that authentic meaning for yourself and that reason, I think is really important.
Absolutely. Those are some great takeaways for our audience today. Noticing that there's so much more that we have to uncover about our world, so much more that we have to discover. The most exciting parts that you do of the projects are the interdisciplinary learning with our team members, where
Yeah,
multiple perspectives they come together to solve problems that you're most passionate about.
yeah,
So definitely integrity, authenticity, and always staying curious despite the external pressure, that's so
yeah,
important for our generation. In classrooms we often see that sometimes the syllabus is being rushed upon, and we don't get that much time to stop and think about what is happening and exploring the
yeah,
questions by ourselves. But it's important that even if there's external pressure, you always come back home, think about the questions yourself, and explore, because that's when the real learning happens, and that's when you get the real ideas. So,
yeah.
those are some great takeaways, Dr. Emma. Maintaining the tempo, let's begin with the next segment of our podcast. How
Okay,
about a rapid fire round? Are you ready, Dr. Emma?
okay, I'm ready.
So here it goes. Dr. Emma, imagine if you could host a basketball game under the sea with marine life as spectators. Which animals would make up the most enthusiastic cheering section and why?
I love this. I feel like sharks, because you would just be like on your toes to like, I think I'd be a lot quicker and a lot more accurate shooting. So yeah, I'm gonna go sharks.
Well, that's a vivid picture. I can almost hear the underwater screams of the sharks. Well, Dr. Emma, what is the most mysterious thing that you've ever witnessed as part of the work you do?
So I think the most mysterious thing I've witnessed was seeing actually a sawfish underwater was probably mysterious for me, because it was quite dark and murky, and I was in Florida and it came over the reef, and I was like, what is that? It was a lot bigger than me, and I just never thought I'd ever see one underwater. There hadn't been one seen there for over 10 years. So I think that was probably the most mysterious creature, at least, that I've ever witnessed as part of any work that I've been undertaking.
Ooh, that must be a memorable experience. Well, Dr. Emma, if you could choose a theme song for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh goodness, a theme song. um, oh, you've got me stumped now. Hold on, let me have a good think about this. Theme song. If it's something about like keep going and keep running and keep motivating, I'm trying to think of a good. I think I keep thinking of Destiny's Child Survivor, which probably makes me show my age now. But that whole theme is about surviving and keep going. And I think for me, resilience has been a part through my basketball career and also through my research career. So I'm going to go with that one.
Well, I need to add that to my playlist right now. I could visualize
Definitely
with you.
showing my age.
Well, I could literally visualize you with Mission Impossible, the excitement of a race against time. Well, ooh. Well, that was fantastic. And so far, it's been an absolutely inspiring conversation listening to your journey and insights, Dr. Emma. Thank you so very much for your time. As we come to the end of this episode, let's wrap up all the learnings and takeaways that we've had in our last segment, the Inspire segment. Well, Dr. Emma, who or what has been your biggest inspiration in life and why?
So I'd say there's been a couple. So I definitely say my mum and dad, for different reasons. They've been my biggest supporters. My mum was just a fighter, and showed me what it meant to kind of keep going and persevere. And my dad has always been the biggest motivator, and he would always say to me, can't's not in our language. You can and you will. I have that up on my board in the office. I have it up at home, and it's such a simple phrase, but especially when things feel challenging, just saying like I can and I will. I say to my son, you can and you will, and that belief, despite challenges, sticks with me now. So definitely inspiration from a career perspective. Sylvia Earle, she broke down a lot of barriers. One of the pioneering female marine biologists, leading several high positions in the US, and so still active, still championing ocean conservation, and the communities that are involved, and also making sure that people actually understand the problems and the solutions and can communicate that in a way that people can relate to. So yeah, my parents and Sylvia Earle.
Well, parents do inspire us all, and definitely at really challenging times, they are the strongest motivators of our life, and somebody that always be there with us and tells us that you can and you will. Despite the challenges, you're going to make it. And definitely, Sylvia Earle is a big inspiration for all of us SDG warriors when we work upon SDG number 14, Life Below Water. Well, what words of inspiration were given to you, Dr. Emma, that you would like to pass along to others?
Well, beyond the one of saying you can and you will. So when you doubt yourself, it's such an easy one to remember, to say you can and you will. But again, I think this comes back actually to something that, that Sylvia Earle has been quoted saying about, that it's not asking or not doubting that one person can make a difference. She's got this quote that, it's often wonders what can I as one person do, but it only takes one person to inspire and to make change. And so I think that that's something as well. It can often feel, quite overwhelming. But if we look through history, everything that's good or bad that's happened is generally because somebody did or didn't do something. And so, that's something that when I've seen Sylvia Earle speak and say these words, that it really resonated with me, because, we have a choice every day of the actions that we do, the words that we use, the things that we decide not to follow or to follow. And so, with that comes responsibility, but it gives us an opportunity to realize that we might be, a small drop, but if our actions of that drop can attract more small drops, then soon there's a puddle, and that puddle can turn in, to a lake, and then the lake eventually can grow, and with that we get, the movement that we need. So I think it's the words I would pass on is to definitely be resilient, and to believe that you can and you will, and to really look to be the positive change that ultimately we need for our planet.
Definitely, those are some gems for all our listeners today. Every drop counts in an ocean, and you could be the change that you wish to see in the world. Even when nobody else has done something, the worst thing that you can do is to expect them to do something that you have thought of something else. So that's definitely something that's a big takeaway for our audience today. Well, Miss Emma, could you give us a call to action? What can we, children and young people, do to make the world a better place?
So I think one of the biggest things that you can do is to share your knowledge with the older generations, and not just the knowledge that you're learning in schools about why biodiversity protection, conservation, climate action is needed, but also why you care. That reminder that this is the planet that you're inheriting, and that you may not be in a position to vote, but people like your parents or your elders in your communities, they can, and the choices that they're making now impact your future. And so I think one of the real strengths that young people can do is to, in their sphere of influence, tell them that the environment is important to them, tell them that they care about, having healthy reefs and having rainforests to visit, and they want the ice caps for their children and their children's children, and it's something important, because I think that generally if people know that there's that emotional connection, they're more likely to act, and they're more likely to do something differently. The other thing then would just be, what is your superpower that you're good at? Find it, harness it, and put that to good. And, you might love coral reefs, but you might say, oh, I'm a really good artist. I'm never going to do anything with corals because, I'm not going to be a scientist. we don't need everybody to be scientists. We need everybody to harness their power for good. And so it might be that you can find a way to use your art to convey the challenges that the planet is facing, or to communicate in ways that often scientists find it hard to do. And so I would say to people, again, that goes back to that authentic comment earlier, is it's like, what is something that you're really good at, and how can you harness that to leave the planet in a better place than it currently is now.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Emma, for sharing that. This reminds me about the Native American proverb that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a big reminder for us. And obviously, share your passion with all your friends, your teachers, your family, your mentors, and your whole community. And always find what you are good at and follow your passion. Find your superpower and be extremely good at it to make an indelible mark on the world for a positive change. Well, Dr. Emma, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Your groundbreaking research on supercorals to your advocacy on immediate climate action, your work offers so much hope and actionable solutions for the future of our oceans. And it was really inspiring listening to all the entire journey, your insights and experiences. I'm sure all our listeners had an enriching learning experience from this conversation too.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for your passion and for all of your insights and for making this possible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emma. And to all our listeners, we hope this episode ignited your curiosity about the wonders of our oceans and the incredible potential of marine conservation to empower and connect communities worldwide. Dr. Emma's work on supercorals is definitely a shining example on how scientific curiosity can drive real world solutions. Remember that every small step we take to encourage a young girl to explore her curiosity in STEM could be a giant leap for innovation and progress. So, whether you're a friend, parent, teacher, mentor, your support can make all the difference. Together, let's all work to create a healthier planet for our present and future generations. Coming with the outro, to deepen your knowledge of everything STEM, sustainability, and education, subscribe to the SDG Warriors podcast, follow Future Reefs, and for in depth discussions and meaningful conversations with leading STEM experts like Dr. Emma, who are shaping a better world one action at a time, do follow this podcast. If you love this episode, help others find it by leaving a review and sharing it with your friends, teachers, and family. And remember to stay curious and be the change. Until next time, it's bye from the SDG Warriors.